It's been nearly 2 weeks since Jedi Fallen Order dropped, and with time to digest the experience, I am more than pleased with EA's first worthwhile use of the Star Wars property, even if it took us 6 years to get here. More importantly, I want to throw heaps of praise Respawn's way for delivering such a high-quality game under their thumb. Much like Batman Arkham Asylum did a decade ago, this sets a new standard for what can be accomplished with the Star Wars license. That said, while Fallen Order is a massive step in the right direction, there's still room for improvement to deliver a knockout in round 2. Today we'll be talking about those improvements as it relates to boss design by digging into what they put out so far. Without further ado, here are the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order bosses ranked from worst to best. Number 10, Planetary Bosses. Today's bottom of the barrel is full to the brim in a 4-way tie between Ogdo Bogdo, Albino Wishhook, Rabbit Yotaz, and the Nidak Alpha. While each of these has a different moveset and asks the player to execute a variety of strategies, they all follow the same theme as a more aggressive variant of their basic planetary counterparts. There's nothing inherently wrong on the surface with having reskin mini-bosses like this, but when you consider them a full-fledged boss, that's when I take issue. Granted, there isn't a disclaimer plastered on them saying so, it's by my own definition that a titled enemy with a health bar is considered a boss. For argument's sake, let's say they are bosses. My problem is that in a boss count of 17, that makes this a near quarter percentage full of reskins. That's nearly a quarter of the roster drained of creativity. In their favor, the basic counterparts are fairly rare across their respective planets, and they do at least add new or altered attacks. This shows a tiny interest in differentiation, but another issue is their damage. Each of these bosses pack an insane punch, and I believe it's to inflate the difficulty so you don't steamroll them too quickly, which you can for the record. The balance swings in the other direction, allowing you to slaughter them in 30 seconds or less with a few well-timed dodges to keep the pressure on. Nearly all my battles with this quartet of shit lasted less than a minute, with one side being completely dominated, and I can't say it was enjoyable even when I was the one to claim victory. Bosses to me are meant to be a satisfying hurdle to overcome, a rewarding climax at the end of a level that solidifies your journey to that point. Instead, these four haphazardly tossed in the middle of their planets as brutes to block off secret upgrades. They do a fine job as guardians, but when the real reward is the upgrade and not the experience, I think that's telling of their worth as a boss. And if we are tossing them off the list as mini bosses, I would still make the argument that isn't an excuse to reskin. Whether boss or mini boss, reskins diminish variety and form a flaccid padding of the runtime better left on the cutting room floor. For that, these are easily the worst bosses in the game and the biggest point of improvement for a sequel. Number 9, Security Droid. One baby step up from the monster barrel is this menial battle with a droid. I say that for two reasons. Number 1, it's easy. There's nothing inherently wrong with being easy as long as it's satisfying, but in this case, it isn't. Much like the monsters, it can decimate your HP quickly, but it's not too hard to obliterate with minimal skill. It doesn't have to be ball-blisteringly hard, but it does need to be engaging. And number 2, though you may face it for the first time here, you'll be facing a horde of them from now on, which drives its rarity into the dirt. Deciding which is worse was a close call, but if I have to choose, I'd say a boss introduction into a standard enemy at least gave it the illusion of being special, if only for a moment. But edging out a pack of reskins isn't anything to cry home about, handily earning the droid this dishonorable mention. Number 8, Bounty Hunter Ambushes. These are 2 steps forward, 1 step back into Bogdo dung. I love the idea of a boss ambushing you at seemingly random points. Boss arenas typically stick out like a sore thumb, so the concept of making the arena a random spot in the level works well with the bounty hunting theme. That theme also adds tension to knowing these hunters fully intend to capture you and hand you over to the Empire. Finally, their design is unique compared to anything else in the game, at first. Though they may randomize their name and combinations, there are only 3 variants of bounty hunters to face. After you fought each of the 3, the magic starts to lose its luster, until you're deep into your 5th ambush, trying desperately to muster up even a spark of excitement that the first surprise battle or 2 holds. They are mechanically simple too, with a mixture of laser blasts, missiles, and some melee strikes that make them feel like little more than advanced stormtroopers. The robot hunter is the most unique, but it's easily countered by dodging behind and smacking that booty. Once you faced all 3, the only challenge comes from dealing with a gank, and that can be alleviated by aggressively focusing on one of the hunters until it's a 1v1. While the ambush concept, somewhat unique design, and tension does earn them brownie points, the repetition wears down the aforementioned favorable features until you're left with another lackluster tally mark to add to your body count. Number 7, ATST. This is the best of the ham-fisted bunch. The ATST is like the security droid in that it introduces an enemy you'll face again in your playthrough, but it is far less frequent. They save it for a few instances where you're holding off Empire forces, and since they do reuse it sparingly, I actually enjoyed their reappearance. A big downside for some may be its laughable difficulty, but I found the power trip to be satisfying and appropriate as a first mandatory boss of the game. Flinging laser blasts back at it and being an ankle biter is enjoyable, and the commenters on the difficulty ranking include me in that you can even force push missiles back at it to further trivialize it. It's definitely not shattering any standards of quality, but it's a solid early game boss. Though it may be a breeze, I think of it like a cool spring breeze. Enjoyable and signals some real heat on the horizon. Number 6, Second Sister. With this being a simplified version of the late game fight with Trilla, I won't spend much time here. Mechanically, this feels like a souped up Purge Trooper with Force abilities. She has a number of different combos to test your parry timing, Force abilities to throw you off, and unblockable moves that keep your over-reliance on blocks and deflection honest. Everything she does has a fair counter, and her tells are appropriately generous for her placement in the mid-game. It's also the first true lightsaber duel you get outside of the brief tutorial sequence, which holds an obvious hype for a first-time player. When comparing it to other duels the game offers in hindsight though, this feels far more simplistic, not to mention how short the fight is. But while it lasts, it does deliver a solid experience that is worthy of an average nod. Number 5, Trilla Sudari. It pains me to say that Trilla doesn't aspire toward higher heights in the endgame. On paper, her gratifying challenge, aggressive move pool, rough parry windows, diverse unblockables, and force powers go beyond the other wielders of the dark side you face in the game. Sadly, this is all trivial in the face of slow. As I mentioned in the difficulty ranking, using slow and dual strikes decimates her health and any semblance of challenge the fight would have offered. Granted, I focused far more on my lightsaber throughout my playthrough and didn't utilize force powers often, so maybe other bosses get the same ding when you find the right ways to use the force to your advantage. But this is like one of those things you can't unsee once you've seen it. My first fight with Trilla was thrilling, but my second with slow was at times as dull as the bottom dwellers. The ability to regain a force meter upon healing all but guarantees victory too. I'm all for giving the player workable tools to overcome a sizable challenge, but the scales are tipped too far in your favor against Trilla. For that, she squeaks into the top 5 against mild competition, and is an interesting case for Respawn to look at when considering how to balance force powers against bosses in the future. Number 4, Darth Vader. The final 3 that exceed Vader are too good to be usurped by a segment that can barely be considered a boss, but there's no way he's not getting a mention. Though this may not be a battle in the traditional sense, it was exactly what it needed to be. You get a brief moment to try and fear to face Vader before quickly realizing how wide the gap between a green Jedi Knight and a Sith Lord is. He embodies every bit of the terrifying presence he carried in the films, and his display of power had me squealing with fanboy glee throughout the final moments. The actual escape mechanics and button mashing is very on rails, but this sequence is by far one of the most memorable in the game, which is enough to earn it a spot just outside an excellent top 3. Number 3, Gorgara. In spite of the lackluster beasts that make up the foundation of today's list, Gorgara stands tall as a near perfect example of what a large beast boss should look like in Fallen Order. From a textbook standpoint, Gorgara has a variety of moves with fair tells that are all creative. They're differentiated enough to be unique, yet not so much that they're trivial to identify and evade. He has a sizable health bar asking endurance from the player over the course of the fight. And if you're clever unlike myself, you might notice the bulge he has on his head begging you to use the force at key moments to unleash big damage. The fight even ends with a cinematic sequence that is one of the game's flashiest moments. My only gripe is how little involvement there is from the player in that sequence, and even when there is, there's no stakes because you can try again and again to mount the bat to move the sequence forward. Of any boss on our list so far, Gorgara has by far the most to offer and minimizes many of the complaints I've harped on. The hitboxes for such a big enemy are on point as well, a nice bit of polish that is worthy of a mention. If Respawn could deliver a beast boss like this on every planet instead of generic reskins, I'd be heralding in the bosses in this game at a higher standard. But even if they don't all deliver on Gorgara's level, at least he's there to set the bar. Number 2, Taron Malicos. What a gorgeous arena. Walking up to Malicos for the first time sent chills down my spine as I prepared myself mentally for the battle to come. You'll need it too. This battle emphasizes your ability to parry to create openings. At times I got into a flawless rhythm, parrying each blow and getting my own strikes in with relative ease. But thanks to his dual wielding, there were times I skipped a beat and got punished harshly for it. Of all the fights in the game, I imagine this has the most depth between difficulties due to emphasis on parrying. Since Fallen Order's difficulties all alter enemy aggression in the parrying window, experiences between Jedi Knight and Grandmaster likely differ dramatically. That gives him a nice design touch that spreads beyond a single playthrough. He has other great attacks such as the lightsaber floating toss, the double lightsaber throw, a few unblockables to evade, and even force tossing rocks at you. It's a lot to handle, but it never felt overwhelming to the point I wasn't having a blast every step of the way. The only knock I have on him compared to the number 1 boss is less overall variety in attacks, but it was a close call. Malicos does set a phenomenal standard of what a lightsaber duel can be, but our number 1 boss soars even higher. And the number 1 best boss in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, Ninth Sister. I can't say I predicted that the Ninth Sister would end up excelling as the best of not only the Inquisitors, but all bosses in Fallen Order, but she does well earn the nod by mixing in the best of everything thus far. Like Trilla and Malicos, she has a variety of lightsaber attacks that include basic strikes, unblockables, and even throws. Where she differs is mixing a level of variety that surpasses those two and even Gorgara for a move pool that keeps you on the very tips of your toes throughout the battle. Also, unlike Trilla and Malicos, she has a brutish power behind her swings, making it a challenge to time deflections. On the flip side, despite that brutality, you can effectively block her swings if you manage your stamina well. But that's no easy feat when she regularly mixes in unblockable thrusts, sweeps, and slams into those combos. She even has a bull rush attack that sticks to you like glue, and it's easily one of the hardest attacks in the game to dodge. All of this is just the warm-up for when she pulls out her double-sided saber and makes the beginning seem like ATST levels of cake. Her dual saber attacks were by far the hardest for me to deflect of any lightsaber duel. It puts an immense pressure on you that is amplified by its placement in the game. Unlike Malicos and Trilla, you likely don't have all those handy upgrades at this point in the game, and admittedly I was still learning the combat system. I eventually learned how key using slow was to heal and get some free shots in, but her girthy health bar and relentless attacks didn't make it the win condition it was for Trilla. Though difficulty isn't everything, when it mixes perfectly with quality you get something truly special. Ninth Sister holds narrative weight as the first time Cal claims victory over another Force user. The setting in the treetops of Kashyyyk is amazing. Her move pool is the most diverse in the game, and the difficulty is the perfect level of engaging challenge that solidifies the rough journey you made to face her. All of that magnificent design mashes together as the peak of Fallen Order's boss quality. With that bar set, I can't wait to see what the future holds for Star Wars and gaming. Let's just say I have a new hope for what's to come. Until then, I want to thank you for watching today, much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.